This morning, I am in Washington visiting with M Acosta, who has been at the Law Library of Congress, or the Library of Congress, I should correct, since February of 2000, and you are currently the chief of the Foreign Comparative and International Law Division 2 of that library. I'm intrigued by that. I never knew they had a 2. There must be a 1 and a 2 and maybe others today. That's not in the script. So I'm giving you an unfair question,
Right.
Louise. I also want to mention, though, in introduction, that you are currently the secretary of the AELL
Right.
and a member of the executive board. And I trust that's been an interesting experience. You're in your 3rd year now, your last year.
Right.
Well, it's our custom as we begin these conversations, as I like to call these sessions, to ask you sort of about yourself as a human being, someone other than just a colleague.
Sure.
Could you tell us a little
Sure.
bit about yourself,
Sure.
your life maybe today and even when you were younger?
Sure, I'll try. First, just to correct, so it's been since 2002 that I
okay.
was at the law library, and I've been at the law library as opposed to other parts of the Library of Congress the whole time.
Yeah,
So
I
the
know
law
for a
library.
little sketchy as I'm reading
Sure.
behind camera here. And
Right, yeah. Well, so I guess a little bit about myself. I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, and went to public schools there. And then when it was time to go off to college, I went to the University of Florida, which is
Not very far.
right about an hour and a half drives away from Jacksonville. And so I studied liberal arts there, sociology, poli-sci, and philosophy, that sort of stuff, and in the College of Arts and Sciences. And then I ended up immediately going to law school after graduating, and so I came up to Washington, D.C., and went to GW Law School. So I graduated. I took the Massachusetts bar because at the time I was thinking about possibly moving to Boston. But, in the District of Columbia, nobody takes the actual District of Columbia
Well,
bar.
they take one of the state ones,
Right.
often in Maryland or Virginia if they're
Right,
local. And,
right,
yeah, then
right.
get waived in.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I took the Massachusetts bar and then waived into the DC bar. And then I was, so I practiced law for a long time, and doing litigation. Worked in a couple of small law firms. We did a lot of different types of litigation. The first firm I worked at for any sustained period of time was sort of an energy law firm. We did work with sort of medium-sized people in the chain of gasoline distribution.
Okay.
So I don't know. My boss had a
Somewhere
bunch of
between the wellhead and the
Wow.
pump.
well, yeah. I mean, very like beyond the refining stage, and then they called them jobbers.
Okay. They
that
sort of
did like
provide the product to
Right.
the
Wholesalers.
to the final place that sells
Right.
it. Yeah.
Right, so independent wholesalers that sold to
Yeah.
retailers, independent retailers. It's a
I
huge
buy,
industry.
I
actually.
buy fuel for my car at Costco because it's sometimes 60 cents a gallon cheaper than
Yeah.
some of the big name ones up the street.
Exactly.
I don't know how those places stay in business, but that's not my concern.
Right, yeah.
And I see the delivery trucks, and they're always independent.
Right,
names.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So those clients had, issues of there were some old regulations that these were price regulations that actually were the first day that Ronald Reagan was in office. In he basically, so that was 1980, January
Somewhere around
17th
the
or whatever,
early 80s, yeah.
January
81.
20th, whenever it was, the first day in office, by executive order, he rescinded those regulations. But they were still generating work for lawyers for, well over a decade after that time.
Oh.
So anyway, so I did a bunch of work, administrative work for the Department of Energy, and we did environmental stuff with underground storage tanks became a big issue. And,
I imagine those, I mean, the pollution that they can cause if something goes awry or they sit in the ground too long and get forgotten because some places closed it. Must have been interesting work.
Right. Yeah. And then insurance coverage issues associated with that. And then we did like some antitrust cases on behalf of some retailers, actually, like chains of gas stations that had disputes with some of the bigger companies and that sort of thing. So anyway, it was, interesting work. And it exposed me to a lot of areas where I felt like I was always in the library researching stuff, I eventually left that job and I went to work with a guy named George Van Cleve, who had started his own little practice here in Washington, doing environmental stuff. He had retired he was pretty high up in the DOJ, and so he did some environmental work and a few other areas, insurance coverage, litigation, and so forth. So I did that, worked with him for about 4 years. Interestingly, shortly after I stopped working for him, he decided that he would go get a PhD in economics from the university, not economics, in history. History from the University of Virginia. He's became kind of an academic. He's written a couple of books since then. But, and I think once he told me that somehow, so while I was working with him, I decided to start going to library school, Catholic at night, Catholic library school. And so I was working with him full-time, going to library school part-time. And I don't know, somehow he credited me with just the idea of not being a lawyer anymore, which I think was perhaps a great contribution.
Moved out of the area topic a little bit.
So anyway, so he, anyway, I did graduate from Catholic, and for a while, I was still practicing law for another 6 months or so full time.
So you weren't quitting cold turkey, so to speak.
Well, at the time I was searching for jobs, but I was not one to embrace geographic. I was going to stay in the D.C. area because you
didn't want to go moving around.
Yeah. So, which kind of limited a tiny bit. I was, looking for entry level law library positions. There's a finite. I mean, even though there's a ton of, plenty of law schools around, there's a finite number of openings at a given time. So I think I did once or twice interview up in Philadelphia or something. So I did consider moving, but I never
Well,
did.
a couple hours up the interstate.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
too terribly
Yeah,
far.
yeah. But so I did get a job at Howard University
Okay.
Law Library.
I saw that in your
And-
background.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I worked there for a couple of years, and then I got the job at the Law Library of Congress.
Mhm.
So I sort of given you like a brief sort of
I know also.
high level overview.
Sort of in between when you were working on library school and before you ended up at Howard, you worked part-time, you said earlier
yeah,
too, at
that's right.
Trinity.
Trinity.
College, which is now a
Yeah,
university.
yeah,
Trinity
Trinity,
Washington
you're right.
University or something.
Right. Yeah.
Everybody
So-
has to change their name someplace along
Right.
the way.
Right. Yeah. Well, Trinity is.
Kathleen.
Yeah. Trinity is. For a long time, it was. I think focused on being a women's college.
It was, yeah.
And I think they had a few famous people, like Nancy Pelosi went there, and a few other famous women.
Well, she grew up
but-
up the road, even
Right.
closer than Philadelphia,
Right,
in
right,
Baltimore,
in
so
Baltimore,
a
right,
local
yeah,
girl.
Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, I had a job there that actually started, and that's of course was just a general library,
Yeah.
and academic library, mainly for undergrads,
Mhm.
and I worked initially, I think it was while I was at library school, and if I'm remembering this right, I got, I think, some credit for working there, like in an internship
Okay.
or an externship,
Yeah.
whatever, from the library, from the programs, Catholic University's program standpoint. But and then I continued to work there part-time on weekends. Like, I believe, I can remember on Sundays, and I was actually opening the door to open the library a few times, which I always found like fun. So I'd wake up early Sunday and go
I would think
open the library.
doing reference in an undergraduate setting would be a challenge of sorts, but it'd be a lot of fun because
Yeah.
the kids would be, well, students, I shouldn't call them kids, but they are now that I've gotten older.
Well, relative.
But,
to-
they're so intense and, this is so important to them.
Yeah.
And you probably get a lot of instantaneous feedback of how appreciative they are of
Yeah.
the help.
Yeah. I mean, I just remember really enjoying it. And remember, this was against the backdrop of having been doing litigation. And I guess
Energy law work.
Right. So, I mean, I guess I should mention that, the reason I decided to go to library school and start thinking about a career in law librarianship rather than continuing to practice law is, I sort of always found doing litigation like really stressful, and I was never one of these people who thrived on conflict. So, which
Son-in-law who's with a litigation firm in Michigan, and it's a stressful job.
yeah. And I spent so much time just trying to imagine being retired from practicing law, and I can't exactly remember when I had the revelation that the most sensible thing for me to do would be to try to become a law librarian, But the one thing I distinctly remember was the the time I most enjoyed while I was practicing was while I was in the library, just researching stuff. You know, so because I was in Washington and working for small firms, and you know, back then, you know, people, you know, we had access to Lexis and Westlaw, but you know, it was still definitely very useful to go and, you know, go to the shelves of libraries. And so I was a patron at the Law Library of Congress a lot.
Okay.
So I actually went and used the law library's resources. I also, as a graduate of GW, I could use GW. I could get into GW's library right downtown in Washington. So
They were the most restrictive law library for visitors from other places.
Right, exactly.
But even they would make exceptions.
Right.
We gave them the sob
Right,
story.
right, exactly. Well, right, exactly. I mean, when you're that geographically close to, you know, so many law firms.
Exactly, that was
You
their
would
problem.
have to
They
be a little-
figured- And then
Right.
there used to be a bar library, actually just north of their campus, across
Right.
the big street.
The
and
Federal Bar
yeah,
Association, yeah.
and they closed it.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so suddenly
Right.
they didn't, the
Right.
bar didn't have that.
Right, right,
So of course,
Yeah.
there was one down the street.
right.
They could
Well,
get in.
yeah, and you know, so I actually at the time worked at, I lived in Capitol Hill, and so actually going over to the Law Library of Congress in evenings. This was back when, you know, on weekdays they were open to the public until 9:30, and I would go over there at night and do a bunch of research. And I remember being chased out right at 9:30, you know, trying to finish my photocopying, and
I guess the
you know,
guys chasing you out wanted to go home.
well, right, exactly. You know, like about 9:25, they came around and let everyone know that it was time to wrap things up. And
When I was a kid, a few years back, I worked at the law library at the university near where I lived, and I was actually in high school age. And we had to go through a whole bank of circuit breakers and flick the lights so that we'd signal everybody at
Right.
10 o'clock when the place was going to close. It was
Exactly.
time to go out.
Right, exactly, yeah. But, so anyway, so I actually don't know why it took me so long to figure out that law librarianship was ideal for me. Because I should have mentioned, so I had two sisters growing up. One of them actually was herself a graduate of library school. She had gone to and gotten a master's degree at Florida State University.
Okay.
And practiced librarianship for a while in a few different places, Ohio and New Mexico, and then she eventually moved up
Unlike
to
yourself,
Seattle.
she sounds like she wasn't grounded in one city or
Well,
geographic area.
Right. She, you know, grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. She eventually ended up in Seattle, Washington.
Oh,
so the
that's
opposite
up near where I
corner.
live now.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
live
so-
near there in Seattle.
Yeah, she still
Yeah.
lives there up in
Yeah.
University, is it the neighborhood University City or University, close to the University of Washington, anyway.
There are a number of colleges and universities in the city
Right.
and in the region.
Yeah, but the neighborhood is called, I think, University City or something like that, maybe, or
Probably the university area. There's
whatever it's called.
there's an area around the University of Washington
Right.
that they refer to the
Yeah.
University District,
Yeah.
I guess it's called.
The U District,
Yeah.
that's it.
And it's
And,
an
yeah.
interesting place, very different from other parts of the city, because you
Yeah.
have the influence of all the university sorts of people that
Right,
enjoy
Right.
that, and
Yeah.
others that enjoy being around them
yeah,
too.
yeah, she and her husband live in that neighborhood.
Okay.
Her husband is sort of a historian, like a local historian. He's
He
done
must
a
find a
couple-
treasure trove
Yeah.
of resources in their
Yeah.
in the university library
Yeah.
system, which you know
Right.
is basically open to the public. It's just
Exactly.
a state-supported school.
Yeah, great place to live.
Yeah.
I guess since you live up that
Well,
way.
I retired from this town,
Right.
actually, Washington D.C., and moved to the other Washington, as we
Right.
call it here.
Right.
Over there, this is the other Washington, the
Right.
one on the east.
Exactly, yeah.
But I had grown up in Seattle, and
Yeah.
it was
Oh,
I
yeah.
returned home after I retired from 30 years
Nice.
here at American University.
Nice, yeah. Well, so anyway, at some point it occurred to me that, like I remember envying law librarians, but for some reason, um, it took me a while to figure out.
You kind of
was a
decided
career
on
for me.
this kind of on your own then, you didn't, or did you
Well,
have somebody that you knew in the field who sort
So,
of gave you information?
yeah, one person I remember talking to about it was a guy named Christopher Reed at
Yeah.
GW. He was a law librarian
Okay.
at GW.
Yeah, I
And,
don't remember knowing him, but I may have.
Yeah, he, eventually became the electronic resources librarian for GW, and I think he's retired now.
Okay.
But I remember I actually shared office space as a lawyer. We were in the same building, same floor for a while with the law firm where his wife worked. So and I used GW Law Library, and somehow it all, I think he may have been the person who basically said, yeah, this is what you ought to do.
Okay.
Check out the Catholic University program. You can go at night if you want, which is what I
And
did.
it's a good library school, always
Yes.
was. In my days here, we thought very highly
Right.
of graduates.
Right.
I hired a few of them over the years
Right.
myself, and they were
Right.
very successful.
I mean, it's definitely a good library school for people interested in law librarianship.
Yeah.
Maybe not as good as the University of Washington, where you're from,
Well,
where you're,
the University of Washington is more of a traditional, I mean, you come there and take the program. Catholic has always been a little
Right.
more adventuresome. They hire some people, librarians down, say in Richmond, and they conduct a program there.
Right.
And you can take some of your library work
Right.
there, and they may have others around.
right,
A little bit has to be here in Washington on the campus,
Right.
but it's a
right,
school that's sort of into looking at alternatives to the more
right,
traditional
right,
approaches.
right. So I was very happy to be able to go there.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, you sort of migrated into the system. I think that's probably the right term. From,
Right.
Practicing
Right.
law
Right.
to
Yeah.
working as
Yeah.
helping at
Yeah.
Howard.
Right.
And you were there a short while, not
2 years.
2 years.
And it was a great experience. The students were great. The faculty was great. Such
Had a
nice
nice
people.
building too.
Wow. So I was there right when they were moving from
Okay.
one. So my first year at Howard was in the old library building.
Oh,
and
when it was a
and
college
they were,
for
by the time
other
I got
people.
there,
Yeah.
by the time I got there, they were already, they of course moving into a new building. They were building the new library building immediately adjacent to the old one. So I was
Yeah.
seeing it being
I
built.
was a consultant for a while on that,
Yeah.
and also on the move.
Right.
Ellis Bullock was dean, I think, at the time. Henry Ramsey had been the dean I started working with him on assisting, so mostly basically as a,
Right,
professional courtesy.
Right.
The
right,
school was on the move up in the right directions, I
Right.
thought. And
Right.
They really were.
yeah, yeah.
Here.
Yeah, yeah. So, and so my first year was in the old building, and then we moved during the summer to the new building, and then I spent 1 year in the new building.
Okay.
Uh,
I remember looking at that. It was absolutely fabulous. And compared to the older facilities, which Howard had purchased a campus that had been a private college,
Mhm.
Catholic
Right.
girls' school, I
Right.
think.
Right.
And so they had the old building where the law school all was, and then it had been a library for the college
Right.
that they were in, but it was wholly inadequate for a law library, and,
Mhm.
you know, at that point in the school's
Right.
life.
Right.
So they built this new one, and I figured, well, everybody else is gonna want to covet all that nice space, those nice
Right.
rooms. I don't know if people started moving in on you or not.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But that, you know, I figured
Right.
that was not my problem.
Right. Right. So I worked there as a reference librarian at
Mhm.
Howard. Helene Davis was
I
the
remember her.
was the head of public services at the
Yeah.
time, so she was my immediate boss, and
Uh-huh.
Rhea Ballard Thrower.
Yeah, she came about the time, in fact, she came just before the move.
Right.
And
She was the
I
director.
was
Right.
working with the school to help engineer the move, but she came in, you know, ready to basically assume the role that she was hired to
Right.
do, and it was a nice transition. And
Right,
I saw a
yeah.
lot of quick, very positive changes.
Right. Right. I was hired by the guy he moved to Nebraska.
Oh, Rich Leiter.
Rich Leiter, thank you.
Yeah.
I was spacing on his name, but of course,
Yeah.
Rich hired me. So I interviewed at the law library
Uh-huh.
while Rich was there, and then that summer is when he moved to Nebraska, and he's been at
And he's
Nebraska
still
ever
there.
since. Right, right.
I visited him several years ago and did one of these
Yep.
conversations with the camera, and he's in
Yeah.
part of the history.
Right.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun to
Yeah.
talk to.
Great guy.
Yeah.
But so anyway, yeah, Rhea came in and was like a really good director. She's now working for the Howard University. She's now like
She's head of the
the whole
university
s-
library
the whole
system.
system,
Yeah, a nice step up, I'm sure.
I
for
guess,
her.
yeah. Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bigger role.
She was one of the people that, you know, we all thought had a lot of potential.
Yeah.
We knew her.
Oh,
when
yeah.
She was coming up. She was down at North
Yeah.
Carolina, places
Right,
before
yeah,
that. But
yeah. So
they,
yeah.
in fact, they tried to hire her earlier before they hired Rich, and because the director at that time had died, and it was, although he was a relatively young guy, and she just wasn't inclined to want to make the move at that point. But when, you know, when Leiter left, they approached him again, and she was willing to talk to him, and
Yeah.
ended up at the job.
Right, right, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you moved from there, and joined the Law Library of Congress
Right.
in August of 2002.
That's right.
And today you are the chief of a major division within the
Right.
library.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about the progression
Right.
from 2002 until now,
Right.
which is 18 years later or
Right.
thereabouts?
So I started there as a reference librarian in the Public Services Division. So the Public Services Division, those are the folks that do American law, mostly, you know, in the reading room. They assist patrons who come in. They also do a lot of question point inquiries, you know, electronically.
Yeah.
And they do a number of different programs. So I was there in the Public Services Division for a number of years. I sort of migrated over toward the foreign comparative and international law side of things at the law library back when the Global Legal Information Network thing was happening, which was a platform.
Oh.
This is back when Rubens Medina was the Law Librarian of
Yes,
Congress. And he was the law librarian there, and this sort of big project of his was an electronic database that would have foreign laws, that would be there would be PDFs of the authentic version of the law, and then there was an indexing system with summaries of what the law did. And so putting together the metadata was like kind of a big undertaking. We actually hired, I shouldn't say the word hired, we engaged people from foreign parliamentary libraries and other foreign people from the countries that were inputting their materials into GLIN, as we call it, GLIN, the Global Legal Information Network. And it was a sort of a massive undertaking. And the goal was someday to be sort of like, to have all the all the law of like maybe the entire world, ingested into it.
A wonderful source.
Yeah.
And I guess the Library of Congress would be the most likely place here in this country that might possibly
Right.
be able to pull all
Right.
that
Right.
together.
Well, it basically was the idea was, the law library actually does have a very vast print collection of foreign gazettes, etc.
Yeah.
And then they traditionally always had like index cards where, you need to find, the family code for Honduras or whatever, and you'd go to the appropriate little index, you go to Honduras, and then you'd look under F for family law, and you'd see the citation, so you would know where in the Gazette to go for the family code, that sort of thing. And basically GLIN was an attempt to transition that into a big global electronic database.
I remember a lot of the librarians that worked there, and especially the international and foreign areas, were many of them were people who come from Europe around or after World War II,
Yeah.
who had scholarship background in the law but couldn't get licenses to practice in
Right.
this country at that time. Ivan Sipkov was one that comes to mind. He was the head of the European Law Division, I think,
Right.
for a while.
Right. Yeah.
A wonderful guy. And,
Right. Yeah. Right. So historically, there were a number of different foreign divisions. Like there was the European division, the Hispanic division. There was an Asian law division, and these various geographical divisions. Eventually, what happened? When I started working at the law library, there were two foreign law divisions that they called the Eastern Law Division and the Western Law Division. And eventually they changed the names because the concepts of Eastern law and Western law never really exactly meshed, because like a French, the specialist who handles France also handles all the Francophone. I mean, it's Western in one sense, but the Francophone countries in Africa, the same guy would be responsible for. So
So it was the language expertise and the idea of knowing the civil law concepts that probably produced his ability to handle all this stuff.
Right. So now they're called FCIL Division 1 and FCIL Division 2. And FCIL Division 1 is what used to be called the Eastern Law Division.
Okay.
FCIL 2 is what used to be called the Western Law
That's
Division.
what intrigued me in my introduction to you. I
Right.
picked up on that, and that's a name or a title, a unit of the library I'd never heard of.
Right. Well, it's formerly known as the Western Law Division,
Okay.
which I guess in some ways was more descriptive, but was also misleading because
Some of the foreign, the
Right.
eastern ones were sort of west and probably
Right.
vice versa.
exactly. So they abandoned that description.
Also-
So what happened? I mean, just to complete my sort of how I ended up. The Global Legal Information Network eventually sort of lost funding after Dr. Medina left as law librarian. Roberta Schaefer became law librarian,
Yeah, I remember,
and Glenn continued for a few years under Roberta,
Yeah.
but eventually Congress Congress did appropriate a lot of money every year for it, and eventually that stopped. So it's sort of you can still see if you Google Glenn Archive, you can still get to the indexing part of it. That's still available.
Well, Rubens himself, before he became the law librarian of Congress, he was in the one of the international
Right.
European law sections.
I think he was in maybe the Hispanic division.
Yeah,
right?
that sounds
So,
about right.
Right.
Yeah, we were sort of surprised when he was appointed because the tradition had been more of a mainstream American type in that job. But, you know, there's nothing wrong with
Right.
being adventuresome and
Right.
looking for someone with a little different background.
Right.
And they did.
Yeah.
You know, like sort of Roberta was more of the kind you would expect.
Right.
He
Right.
succeeded in.
Right. So anyway, I was in the FCIL Division 2, and there's a woman named Edith Palmer who was chief for a while, and she retired after being at the Library of Congress for like 40 years altogether, or something like that. And then I ended up first as an acting chief, and then I eventually got the permanent chief position.
Now, you were working presumably with the materials, and is that sort of how you developed the expertise to basically understand and recognize what it was you were working with?
Well, so I should have mentioned that a lot of when I first started working in Glenn, I was actually inputting American law materials into
Okay.
Glenn, because we were putting in American, public laws,
I mean, essentially,
Federal-
we're part of the
federal
the world
public
system
laws.
too, I
Right,
guess. We
right,
should be
exactly.
there.
Well, like I was saying, the idea was to enable like sort of instantaneous comparative law research by topic, and unfortunately, that dream, you'd be able to, do a search, say, on a topic, say, whatever, extradition or whatever, and then just pull up across all these different countries, extradition laws in a single search, But again, like, it ultimately lost funding from Congress. But anyway, I got into it doing American law, and I'd also always been sort of an international law person, so I, not so much foreign law, but the
Had
law of
you
nations.
studied some of that when you were a
Right.
student at GW?
Yes, and also I had even, I didn't mention this, but while I was practicing law, we actually had on occasion, I did some international law work. I did some litigation against this German company called Metallgesellschaft. They were selling futures, like gasoline futures or something, and we got involved in a bunch of litigation, and then I did some other international work. So I had done international litigation on top of all the other types of litigation I've
Did
done. So,
you ever know a professor there, Tom Mergenthal? Was he on faculty at GW? Because he was, human rights was his focus, but he was international focus.
I don't remember
Quite
the
well
name.
regarded.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I don't know.
Yeah, I just, we're not scripted for that question,
Yeah.
but it sounds like you didn't know.
Right.
He may have retired at that point, I'm not sure. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've had an interesting career, especially at the Library of Congress, and then have worked your way into a niche that sounds like it's a reward in its own right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, even though so the people I supervise are all foreign law specialists from foreign countries, an attorney from Brazil, an attorney from Argentina, one from Mexico, one from Nicaragua, one from the UK, one from Germany, one from France, he grew up sort of in France and in the United States, sort of back and forth, I think. So he's got a very strong Francophone background.
Yeah.
So basically the foreign law reports and responses to inquiries from Congress, the executive branch, the public. I review them before they go out, and I think the value of having someone from an American law perspective reviewing their work, because the patrons tend to be coming at it from an American common law orientation. So I try to make sure that it conveys the ideas in a way that American lawyer,
This sort of approach that they use in trying to find something.
right. I mean,
Yeah.
so they would understand, So anyway, that's basically my job now, to supervise the foreign law specialists.
Sounds like a interesting type of work. But you're not all just buried in the library. You've been involved in some publication, professional writing, and
Right.
service. You want
Right.
to talk a little bit,
Right.
perhaps, about some of your writings first?
Sure. Well, I guess over time I've had a few things published in different places. Trying to remember. I did a sort of a big piece that got published in Legal Reference. What is it?
Services quarterly?
Quarterly. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
LRSQ on the District of Columbia, the legal history of the District of Columbia, which was a great project for me. I really enjoyed. It basically goes up to, it's the legal history of the District of Columbia up to Home Rule,
Okay.
which is a pretty interesting
It
history.
covers most of the time.
Well, right.
It's been around.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right, till around 1974 or so.
Yeah.
But, I've had a few other things published. One was, recently, the last couple of years, I've contributed to some big sort of multinational projects by the European Parliamentary Research Service, which is sort of like the Congressional Research Service for the European Parliament. And they do these comparative law reports on given topics. These are pretty substantial publications of like about 25 pages long. So I would do the American law portion. I did one on American privacy law that got made part of a multinational report covering a lot of different countries. And I also did one on individual rights and judicial review to enforce human rights. I did the American law portion of a report that they published. So they took a long time to put these together. So this was like my portion. It was about 25 pages long, and they had the editing process was a little different because they used different conventions than we use in American scholarship. But anyway.
As you describe this, I can think of what if Reuben's dream had actually come together.
Right,
I mean,
wow.
this would be a huge source and internationally accessible every place
Right.
because of the internet.
Right.
They're doing bits
these are
and
available,
pieces
right.
in other ways.
Right, and then they in turn have their translators take the reports that are initially published, like the Italy report was done in Italian, and German report done in German, and so forth, and then they translate those into like other languages within the major, European Parliament languages.
Yeah, they had under their official documents, they had different languages, and when the UK joined, now they're not part of the EU, but they added English, and of course we were a depository at my university,
Right.
and we chose English for some reason. We had been getting French,
Right.
which was also
Right.
available.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting that the extent to which English, even though the UK has left, they still have Ireland, and English is still sort of a lingua franca.
Yeah.
To use an ironic expression, but in the European, it's one of the major languages, and even though the UK has left, it's going to remain that way.
Maybe to put this in context, because we don't know what the future there will be, we're talking in February of 2000, so the Brits have been out of the out of the EU for about less than a month, I think.
Right, exactly, yeah. And they'll still be bound, I guess, by EU law for until December
Agreed to
31st
be kept
this year.
basically everything going for another year
Exactly,
after they left.
exactly, but
We'll see,
yeah.
Oh, well, it sounds like you dabbled in publications big time in some ways too, but you've also been of service in the profession. I mean, I mentioned in the introduction that you're now the secretary of ALL and on the board, which is, one form of service, but
Right.
usually isn't something they hand out unless you have a track record of having done a few other things
Right.
along the way.
Right.
Would you like to talk about any of that?
Sure. So one committee that I served on pretty early on in my law librarianship career was a special committee that I was appointed to called the Economic Status of Law Librarianship. Bob Daring, thank you.
Yeah.
So the first year he was chair, and then the special committee, the economic status of law librarianship, it's a big issue, and it wasn't going to be solved in 1 year. So they extended it to the special committee for a second year, and then I was chair of that special committee for the second year. And the biggest thing I did, as I recall from, we did some reports or at least a report and a survey of some sort, I think. But the biggest thing we accomplished was to make it, basically petition the board to make it a permanent standing committee. So it remains a standing committee.
Fairly significant
Right.
issue for every one
Right,
of us
of course.
in the field. I
Of
mean,
course.
that's
Yeah.
our bread and butter.
Of course.
Comes
Well,
to that.
right. And back in I think it was around 2001, 2002, when we were first a special committee. It was a time when, lawyers were making lots and lots of money. This was, before the recession, and there was a lot of money in the legal field, and then there was the question of like, well, why aren't law librarians getting a somewhat larger piece of it, of all this money swimming around, given that you have to have a lot of education.
A lot of people in law library work are also law trained, and that
Right.
we've seen increase quite a bit over the last
Right.
few
Right.
decades.
Right.
So are we in a
Right.
slightly different market now
Right.
than we once were? I mean, but that's what your committee probably had to look at.
Right. So that, like I said, I think making it a standing committee that still pays attention to these issues was the biggest legacy of that special committee.
Oh,
And,
also is a certain degree of permanence and expectation there. With a special committee, quite the opposite, it's gonna go away.
Right.
Presumably. Yeah.
So, and then I've done a few other things. I've been the chair of the Legal Information Services to the Public Special Interest Section. I've been on a few other committees, and then I have been on, this is my third year as secretary for the board.
Well, it's probably been an interesting run of things, and it's not over. I mean, you may be going off the board next summer, but I mean, you can have a little relief on that at the moment. But you're available and you're
Right.
trusted and
Right.
true.
Right.
They'll be
Right.
back.
Right.
Something,
Right.
and you'll enjoy probably doing it.
Right.
As well.
Yeah. I have friends from law school that are all retiring now, but I joined the field of law librarianship because I wanted a sustainable career. Back when
Well,
I
being a
before-
litigator, I mean, that's a burnout potential.
I really felt
It's a very intense
Right.
type of
Right. Yeah.
job.
Right.
Yeah.
And I have two daughters, 13-year-old and an 11-year-old. I didn't even want to bear, be. Not that I bore the children, my wife did. I will concede. That,
Still, as dad, you have responsibilities for helping raise them.
Right. I almost said I wasn't going to bear children, but anyway, obviously, being a parent, I can do that. I didn't feel like I could back when I was doing litigation. I mean, some people can, and I applaud them
I'll
for
always
being able to.
remember the experiences you have now as a parent, and especially when the daughters become parents themselves.
Right.
They're good years. I mean.
Right. Well, anyway, I'll be having to work a long time just to pay off the college tuition that
That, unfortunately, is reality.
Right.
I've been helping my own daughter, who's actually about 50 now, and she still has a little bit of student debt. And, they have other priorities in their lives for money, and so I've been helping, and we're going to actually eliminate the last of it probably within the next month or two.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm old enough to. Back when I went to the University of Florida, it was almost free.
Yeah. Oh, same thing when I went to the University of Washington. I mean, we paid $100 a quarter. They had the 3 quarters during the academic year, and a 4th one in the summer if you wanted to go. And, it was $100, and they raised it by $15 a quarter. We were so incensed. Boy, the students today, that would look like, what were we so incensed about?
And when I went to law school, that was like 82 to 85.
Yeah.
It's cheap. I mean, relative to what we are experiencing now.
Yeah. Even at GW, because
Right.
a private school.
Oh, yeah.
Has
I mean, I
higher
guess
tuition.
it didn't seem cheap at the time, but with the
Well, that's
perspective
the
of
other
what things
thing,
cost now.
what were people making in their jobs in those days? It's a certain relativity
Yeah,
to some
yeah.
of this, I guess.
So I think in retrospect, the flexibility I've had with my career, was at least in part a function of the fact that I didn't have massive law school or, undergrad and law school debts, but anyway.
It's gotta be tough for young people. They have that burden and then they go out and they wanna, get housing and do all the things
Right.
that our generation was able to do.
Right.
And
Right,
it must be difficult.
right.
Well, I suppose in a way, we're probably nearing the conclusion of our conversation today, Louise, but is there anything, and this is customary to ask, and you don't have to have anything, but is there anything we haven't talked about that you would like to bring up?
Other than, noting and acknowledging that I've been lucky to have joined the law librarian profession,
I have heard versions of that in almost all these sessions, and I've done almost 240 of them now in
Right,
the last few
right.
years. And my own interview was conducted by a colleague a few years ago, and I think I said the same thing or something version of it.
Right, wow.
It's a wonderful way to
Right.
earn a living.
I feel like my, 14 years or so of litigating, I paid my
Paid your dues.
yeah, so I feel like at least the latter part of my career was something that I feel fortunate to have experienced.
Well, you have your outside of work life now, and probably
Right.
more of that, a more better balance because
Yeah.
of the compensating factors
Right.
of not having to worry about that trial next week or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, perhaps with all that said, Louise M Acosta, I want to thank you for taking time today to come over here to Georgetown where we're doing this session instead of at the Library of Congress, which is near but not right next door.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for doing it, and of course, I'm thanking you just not only on my own behalf, but that of Frank Hodak, Michelle Wu, and Dick Spinelli, our colleagues with whom I have been working and have the pleasure of working to put together this oral history of law librarianship for the Spinelli Law Library Reference Shelf portion of HeinOnline.
Well,
Thank you.
It's been an honor, so thanks very much. I appreciate it.